When Barnum was a young man, a young boy, his parents, like most parents, sent him to school. And the school had one large room and a couple of smaller closets for different supplies. It had a bell on top, and it was whitewashed white. It had steps leading up to the front. There was like a wind box on the front porch where the teacher would stand and watch the kids play during recess time. And there were two parks. There was the park called Snowball Park, where it was okay to throw snowballs and hit each other, and then there was the snowball throwing area. He was usually found in the snowball area or just on the front steps talking with the other boys, or just out of sight swindling the other boys out of their lunch money through gambling gigs. Barnum was pretty smart, and he knew how to wheel and deal, even as like a 6-year-old. So the bell rang, clang, clang, clang. The teacher was, all the kids filed in and sat down at their desks. And their teacher was barely taller than Barnum. She was very small, and she had real light blue eyes and long sand-colored hair and sharp features, and she was strict and she was mean, and you better be on time and you better have your homework in or you'd get a tongue lashing and you'd get in trouble when you got home, because she was quick to tell your parents if you did anything wrong, and she was always talking to Barnum's parents. So anyways, he had to sit in the front row because he was a troublemaker, and she was talking about draconians and giving a lecture on how there hadn't been a dragon in the land for a long time, and draconians came from seeding dragon's teeth in the ground, and they grew up as soldiers. And when they first came out of the ground, all they wanted to do was kill, kill, kill. But after a couple of years of just random massacring everything they came into contact with, they got bored of that, and then they became assassins and like ninjas and super stalkers and spies, and eventually they became these enlightened, super intelligent artists and scientists, and because it had been so long since there had been a dragon in the world, most of the draconians that were alive at this time were very, very old draconians that were, ministers of heads of state, and deeply entrenched in monastic orders, and they were teachers and artists and stuff. So she was explaining to our class that if you ever meet a draconian, you need to be very, very, very polite to them, and call them sir, and make sure to mind your manners, because not only are they capable of killing you with a blink, they're incredibly powerful, enlightened, intelligent creatures. Then they had their math class, then and the writing class, and they studied history and all of those things. Then he went home, racing out of the front doors of the steps with all the other children, and got into the shop, and there were two Annette Toms that came in right behind him, two brothers, Carl and John, and they didn't quite fit in the door. They had to and hunch, and once they were in, they kind of sat down on the floor and curled up so that they could keep their backs straight, because they were so big they didn't fit in a regular human house. There were about the regular humans were a little bit smaller than us, and Annette Noms are probably 8 foot tall. So, at a 6 foot ceiling, you get the picture. Sitting down, they were roughly the size of a regular human. Well, they traded and bartered back and forth. They traded some, hides and dried meat and dried fish and stuff with Barnum's father, and traded news, and so on and so forth. And they left, and they had tents and stuff outside of Plainsville, where they slept that night. They did some hunting in the area and brought back 2 great big wapitis and roasted them over spits over great big fires. Their campfires could be seen like for miles away because they were just huge. So the next day, Barnum goes to school, and the teacher talks about dragons with a big D versus dragons with a little d. Dragons with a big D are kind of godlike creatures. They never die, and they just have a personality or a spirit, and they change forms, and they're very intelligent. They are never really born, but they never really die. Dragons with a little d look like dragons. You know, they fly, they're lizard things, and there are many of them in the world at this point, but there aren't any dragons with a big D in the world right now. And sometimes these dragons with a little d, you know, they hunt wapiti, they hunt grazers, they'll come in and take a goat, sometimes a person. They're like big flying pterodactyls that fly around and hunt. There are several other lessons that she teaches through the day. Barnum goes home, back to the shop that evening. That night, John and Carl are seen by a couple of people walking into town late, and they're kind of like, why are they here? Barnum's eating dinner with his parents, and he's like, you know, rumor has it our school teacher's like super rich. She isn't from Falkland, you know. She comes from the islands up north of Falkland, and she's like an heiress, and she inherited incredible amounts of money. And they're like, shh, that's not something you need to spread around. That's something that's her business and none of yours. He shrugs. Well, John and Carl go to the teacherage behind the schoolhouse, knock on the door, and the teacher answers, and they grab her, throw her over her shoulder after they've gagged her, carry her out of town, throw her over the top of one of their tinsel dons, and ride off with her. Next morning, Barnum goes to school, and everything's locked up, except for the door of the teacherage, which is wide open, and none of her belongings are gone, just her. I'll leave it there.